piece of art that shows a woman who is extremely heavyset. Her rolls of fat droop very low, and her buttocks is large and flat. She is depicted this way not because she is attractive, but because she may have been used to represent the image of reproduction. Her private areas are detailed, emphasizing the woman's reproductive regions that emphasize fertility. This was an important piece of artwork for the culture in which it was produced, because it shows the woman as distorted and fat. However, it still praises the fact that this bodacious woman boasts fertility and life. I think that the cultural context influences the artwork's appearance, because it is apparent that although the woman is fat, she is not condemned. In today's society, overweight people are scoffed at and ridiculed, not praised for being fertile and fruitful. It seems as though this piece was carved out of a type of stone. The texture of the stone seems to be bumpy. The color hue seems to be dull, earthy, one that seems weathered and ancient. The form of the work seems to work hand in hand with the shape of this piece, as the shape of the woman is one that is bountiful, large, and circular. There doesn't seem to be much movement in the art form, as the woman seems to be standing still, almost as if someone is in the process of looking at her critically. The proportion of the piece is quite obvious, as the woman is much larger than our culture perceives as acceptable. The sculpture of Menkaure and his wife, Queen Kamerunebdi II from Giza, created 2515 BCE, is an excellent example of how Egyptians depicted most of their human forms in art. One of the most prominent themes in Egyptian art is the style of frontalism. Frontalism shows the human form in its realist image. The heads are usually straightforward with the shoulders straight and solid. The chest is also frontal, and the legs are always in front of the body, with both feet clearly showing. There were also always two arms visible in the artworks. The style of frontalism is important to the cultural significance of the time period because the Egyptian people believed in something called ma'at. It was the Egyptian concept of truth, law, justice, rights, and basically the whole order of everything. That is why, in all the artworks from the time, 2 arms and 2 legs are always visible. If they weren't visible to the viewer, it would be as if the person was missing an arm or a leg, simply because it wasn't shown in the art. This is because, according to Ma'at, what is written is true. If 2 arms and 2 legs were not depicted in the statue, it would be as if they were missing limbs. Aside from the significance of frontalism and Ma'at in the Egyptian culture, the piece itself seems to be one capturing a serious mood. Most Egyptian artworks showed the human form to be serious, lips pressed together, clothing straight and neat, headpiece prominent. This is because the serious and rigid pose of the frontal view gives the person in the piece prominence. It seems to demand attention and announce power. Also, since the husband and wife are next to each other frontally shown, it establishes a feeling of unity in the pair. The statue is carved in one piece with an upright back slab. The color of the statue is a deep gray, its value dark. Both humans seem to have a smooth texture, even though their bodies are rigid and stiff. The shape is very organic, as you can see that both figures seem to possess very human features. There is not much movement in this picture due to the rigidity of the humans depicted. Also, even though I am unable to tell the scale of the piece from its picture, it seems as though it stands proudly and prominently tall. Two artworks from the Greek era that depict their typical human form are Zeus, created sometime between 460 and 450 BCE, and Discobolos, originally sculpted in 450 BCE by Myron. Although Greek art often resembled the art of the Egyptians, Greek artists tended to make certain changes to their artwork that distinguished their art from Egyptians. As you can see from the examples, most males tended to be naked instead of clothed. They were often made with a little extra stone, and they seemed to have a more natural, muscular look to them. Also, one of the main differences between human forms in the Egyptian art versus the Greek art style is eye definition. In nearly every piece, the Greek sculptors did not give their artworks eye definition. I think that both of these statues are significant to the depiction of Greek art because they are both showing a sense of movement, as both are involved in some sort of physical activity. I think that this is culturally significant because the Greek culture was one of the first to start athletic events. They were the founders of the Olympics, and they seem to embrace the feeling of movement in their art. Our textbook tells us that athletic contests were a prominent component of male life in Greece and its colonies. Greeks viewed physical prowess as a virtue, and victors in games won a measure of fame. The statue of Zeus is almost 7 feet tall, and its impressive carving shows what seems to be Zeus about to throw a thunderbolt. His stance and muscular tone clearly show the god's power. In the statue of Discobus, the artist Myron carved an athlete who was famous at the time for his sport. Like the statue of Zeus, the man's power is clearly shown in his stance, his muscular definition, and his powerful grip on the discus. Both of the statues are bronze and seemingly possessing smooth texture. The scales of both pieces are quite vast, larger than life. The movement in both sculptures is also intense, creating a sense of action in both men. The shape is organic as the piece possesses curvilinear shapes, and the space of both pieces is immense, both spread out to their athletic capabilities. One of the ways that Roman art depicted humans was in a form called the veristic style. This form played an important role in Roman art because it showed the human in its most realistic form. That included features like wrinkles, warts, hooked noses, receding hairlines, etc. Instead of smoothing over imperfections, Romans thought it important to show the way the person really looked, so that it would show their true identity. Especially if the person was in a position of power, they would have lots of wrinkles from the stress of their job, and the art form of verism showed the public that their authority was honest and powerful because they were depicted in their true form. I think that this style possesses cultural importance because the Romans felt that responsibility and respect came with seniority. If in artwork the person was shown to be old and haggard, it depicts that they have been through a lot, are older, and can make better political decisions because of previous life experience. A strange feature of veristic style, however, is the lack of eye definition. Like the Greeks, the Romans did not give their veristic art forms any eye definition. Their eyes are blank and vague, giving the realistic-looking sculptures a zombie-like feel. All of the examples that I have shown seem to have a subdued, bland color with a dull hue. They all seem to be made out of the same type of stone, and they seem as though the texture would be rough to the touch. There is a prominent textural contrast in the deep wrinkle lines and facial imperfections, and the scale does not seem to be too overwhelming with size. One of the major themes in early Christian art was creating an image of Jesus and his followers. In countless pieces of artwork from that time period, Jesus and spiritual images seemed to be the primary focus. An example of one of the Christian artworks was the painted ceiling of the Catacomb of Santissimi in Rome, Italy. The image painted on the ceiling of this particular catacomb showed countless references to Jesus and his biblical story. He is also shown as the Good Shepherd, which has cultural significance to that time period. During the time where early Christian art was being produced, Christianity was illegal until Emperor Constantine started believing in religion himself. Until then, however, Christians were brutally persecuted and had to worship in hiding. This is why they used the catacombs and why their artwork can be found within them. Small groups of Christians would meet in the underground areas, also known as catacombs. Even though they were decorated with Christian artwork and paintings, the catacombs were used by many different people, not just the Christians. Therefore, when Christians painted within the catacombs, they couldn't just outright draw Jesus, because then other people would know that they were meeting there. They instead had to disguise Jesus Christ as pagan figures, for example, the Good Shepherd, an image of a shepherd leading his flock, an image that was only identifiable by the Christian group. Many of the paintings were crude and seemed to lack artistic skill, yet they showed stories from the Bible and encouraged the Christians that worshipped there. The Catacomb of Santissimi had several thicker lines outlining separate biblical stories. The images are colorful, but the hue seems to have dulled over time. There are geometric shapes within the artwork, and we can see several lines and semicircles within the piece. The image seems to be well balanced because of the symmetry that is apparent in the painting, and the unity makes the piece seem well put together and achieves a sense of harmony. An interesting theme that took place during the Gothic art period was the concept of manuscript illumination. Although at first many of the manuscripts were only produced for the very wealthiest, like the kings and queens, it was a unique and interesting way that the Gothic period depicted humans in art. They would draw out a story with images instead of words. This theme is relevant to the culture of the time because it shows that all people were not blessed with the opportunity to see and use the manuscript illuminations. They were mainly produced for the personal enjoyment and education of the royal family only, unless there were others who could afford the expensive artistic treat. There are several different examples of manuscript illuminations. The Crucifixion and Deposition from the Psalter of Blanche of Castile, scenes from the Apocalypse of a Bible Morosely, Melchizedek and Abraham from the Psalter of St. Louis, Master honors David and Goliath from the Prayer Book of Philip IV the Fair, Jean Pachel's The Betrayal of Christ from the Hours of Jean d'Or, and The Enchanted Garden from Le de Douline. These are just several examples of manuscript illumination that existed during the Gothic art period. It is interesting how the images of humans throughout these pictorial manuscripts all look similar. Most are fully clothed and robed, they have similar body posture and form, and many of the characters look a lot alike. Most of the examples do have distinct lines separating different parts of the story. All of the shapes made from the lines seem to be geometrically shaped in circles, squares, rectangles, and triangles. The colors are very bright, although they seem to have dulled over time, but a recurring theme seems to be the extensive use of the colors blue and red throughout the artworks. Perhaps the artists meant to put an emphasis on the colors red and blue because it seems to provide the viewer with a nice contrast between colors.